Koga is the protagonist of Kengan Omega. He has the legendary Fist Eye, he is learning the Nico style, pre-initiative, and has defeated the likes of Ryuki, Zia and recently Yumi, a previous Fang of Metsudo. Some people hate him, others like him quite a bit. One thing you cannot ignore is that his rise in power throughout Kengan Omega has been pretty impressive, starting out as complete fodder to anyone who participated in Kengan Ashura, now becoming someone that may be capable of pressuring the top tiers part of the Kengan Association, with his growth continuing to occur without a doubt. Sit back and I hope you enjoy. So guys, you're watching the mysterious Chad channel right now, but you're not subscribed. Boys, come on, gotta fix that up. So boys, I have a video here from my fellow Mad Lad Kengan YouTuber Dio Blitz, entitled "Here's Why Koga is S tier Now." In recent videos, I've claimed I still don't believe Koga is within the top 20 strongest when it comes to Kengan. Then shortly after that, I saw him release this video, so I'm very interested to see his perspective, whether or not I will agree, disagree, etc. Here is my initial reaction. Of course, make sure to check out his channel, link in the description. So let's have a look. S tier is quite the bold claim, but I'm sure he'll be explaining why.
Let's start off with what I mean when I say S tier.
Everyone's S tier ranking could be very different. Personally, I have quite a few characters in S tier now, but I also have double S tier, etc. So all this depends on own perspective, so let's see.
When I talk about the S tier fighters, I'm typically talking about characters that are about as strong as Agito.
So the S tier is the certified top tiers of the Kengan Association: Kano, Lo Long, Gao Lang, Jirota, Oma, Ryan, Kuroki, those type of fighters. So Koga is an S tier now. Okay.
Lo Long, Gao Lang, Jirota, Kuroki, and someone like Oma. This tier of characters have been considered more or less.
Yeah, most people agree that these guys are the same tier. The story literally tells us this over and over. Yes, you can rank them in a specific order, particularly after the recent champion tournament. Kano is ranked above Lo Long, Jirota, and Gao Lang. Naturally, Oma and Kano debates are going to continue for quite some time. Narrative is in Oma's favour, but all these guys being in S tier certified is this how it is.
The strongest until we got to the Edward Woos, the Nikos, the Wormheads basically, and Shen Wulong. They're directly below them. And for the...
I don't know if I agree entirely with that. Like, Shen Wulong is like levels above. Yan, Gilbert, and the Tiger Nico are probably on that level now. This is partly due to all the time skips. Kure Ryan, for example, is meant to be fighting Gilbert shortly in the story. For that fight to make sense at all, Ryan has to be on Gilbert's level, and Gilbert has been confirmed as stronger than Edward many times, so current Ryan should be above Edward from the past. Likewise for anyone who's meant to be on Ryan's level as well, like Oma for example, who's meant to be fighting Shen Wulong. Yes, you can rank the other Worm guys above them, but I still believe they're like on the same tier at this point, with Wulong as the certified levels above.
The S tier characters, I have mainly two conditions to put a character in that tier. The first one is that they can dominate a fight against an A tier fighter. So,
if they can dominate a fight against an A tier, so anyone in A tier, let's say Okubo, probably Rito now, Nitoku, Ludong, Carlos. If they can dominate one of these fighters, they go in S tier. I think that's pretty fair, but would Koga be able to do that?
For reference, looking at Agito versus Julius. Julius is an A tier fighter. I think everyone can admit that now. That
is a pretty good comparison. Kano absolutely destroyed Julius. Prior to this, Julius is recognized as pretty up there in the ranking, and the way Kano destroyed him in comparison to the difficulty he faced against Lo Long and Gao Lang, it does highlight a pretty big difference between A and S tier per se.
He performed against Agito is what I would expect an A tier. What would happen if an A tier fought an S tier? If we go back to Kengan Ashura, Kuroki versus Mikazuchi Rei, how that fight went, where Kuroki dominated the majority of the fight. That is
a key aspect of the Rei and Kuroki fight is that Kuroki does have prior knowledge of Rei's martial art due to fighting his father, and low-key preparing in the prior rounds. Yes, Rei was able to shock Kuroki due to amping his speed even further, but a key aspect is Kuroki knowing how to counter that entire fighting style before it even began.
The expectation for my first requirement. However, I will admit that this isn't necessarily consistent because an S tier's performance against an A tier or below character can sometimes depend on compatibility or...
Yep. Incredibly important point for Kengan. Sandro has told us many times in the manga that a lot of fights do come up to compatibility issues where one fighter will perform very well against someone else due to being weak against soft styles, as an example, or various other aspects that go into it. But as a whole, I do believe S tiers don't really have the main compatibility issues against the lower tiers. For example, an S tier who may be bad against soft styles should be able to still destroy an A tier soft style user, or maybe even one in the same category like Gao Lang was able to do against Jurata. But of course, various other factors do come into play as well.
Matchup. So think of Jurata versus Meguro. However, those are outlier fights, in my opinion. My second requirement is a high diff fight against another S tier. And so now that I've put my conditions and my definitions...
Yeah, if you're able to push another S tier to high difficulty, means you're relative to a degree. So, yeah, that's fair. But I wouldn't say Koga has done any of that. Like, he hasn't fought an S tier fighter to high difficulty. And I wouldn't say he's destroyed a current A tier as well.
On the table, I'm going to proceed on and talk about why Koga probably makes the cut to S tier and is only really missing my second requirement, and that is thanks to the fight he had against Yumigahama, who we...
So, his view, based on what he's about to talk about most likely, is that due to Koga being able to destroy Yumi, who I'm guessing he views it as an A tier, that means Koga should be S tier. So a major issue with that is I don't believe Yumi is A tier. Yes, you can make arguments during the purgatory time span that he probably belongs in A tier, but even at a narrative level, he was kinda shit on by the other purgatory fighters, and the whole reason he was chosen as a Fang was kinda suspicious, particularly when he was completely outclassed by Misasa, a Fang after him, and no one really believes he's close to Kanagito as an example as well. But the biggest issue I have for ranking someone like Yumi in A tier, particularly now, you can make arguments that maybe he got weaker over the time skip since he was defeated by Misasa. No absolute proof of this, but could be the case for all we know. But the thing that's being told in the story is that Koga is indeed much stronger now. But the point I'm making is I wouldn't view Yumi as S tier right now due to the progression of power in the story. And even back during the Purgatory arc, his feats weren't even that impressive as well, as when he faced Jose, he was able to defeat him in a dominating fight as the story told us, but we see that his whole arm was literally destroyed. If you compare this to the Kengan Ashura Annihilation Tournament, if Yumi was to face Jose in round 1 and get his arm destroyed in such a way, I would view that as a high difficulty fight, not him dominating in any way. There's a big difference between Kano defeating Okubo in round 1, the difficulty shown there, which probably was medium difficulty. Some would even argue high difficulty due to the amount of damage Kano actually took. But medium difficulty, I would say. You can't really compare that to Yumi's injury he suffered from Jose in the past, where it was considered a one-sided stomp, but also getting this insane amount of damage. On top of that, I think most people can agree that someone like Segabahashi is above Jose due to the dynamic in every point during earlier Mega. However, you could maybe say they're on the same tier, but since we haven't seen Jose in a long time, which has been quite strange, but regardless, Seki above Jose, Seki above Okubo, Okubo certified A tier, likewise with Seki. Do people believe Jose is A tier? I wouldn't really say so, considering he wasn't even performing that well against early story Roruki, and then Yumi taking that amount of damage from him even back then doesn't really make Yumi seem that impressive, particularly now after all this time where his stock's at the lowest point it's ever been. But let's see if he can cook.
We all know was the Fang of Metsuro, specifically the 6th Fang, which is a pretty big title for him to have, and I think that's the first indication that he probably sits in the A tier. But let's get it.
So, I already mentioned my issues with the Fang thing. Another thing to talk about is how the Fangs are chosen. There's various statements that the Fang of Metsuro is regarded as the strongest fighter part of Metsudo's personal army. There are some issues where people debate about whether this includes the personal bodyguards to previous Fangs of Metsudo as well, which likely doesn't. Also including the extermination force, which has Misasa, who ended up becoming a Fang after Yumi, with some having the argument that narratively at the time Yumi was stronger than Misasa, but once we got to see their fight, that was completely disproven, providing the argument that the personal bodyguards, extermination force aren't part of that conversation. And during the time Yumi was chosen, that's when Metsudo was kind of just vibing, not really caring that much about Kengan matches per se, due to him stepping down after losing in the Kengan Ashura Annihilation Tournament, just choosing whoever, maybe a young fighter, etc. Also being aware that he may have been a traitor as well. So there were various other factors that resulted in Yumi becoming a Fang, which wasn't to the same caliber or degree as previous Fangs. For example, when Kano Gito was fighting to be a Fang, he had much more competition and was able to prove himself much more than what Yumi was required to.
Into a bit more evidence, and that is the first time we hear about him. I think it's from Ryo, and he's talking to Agito at the beginning of Kengan Omega. And as he's explaining the situation to Agito about what happened with the whole Metsuro situation, since there's been like 3 ex-Fangs of Metsuros at this point, Ryo says that he saw the traitor Fang, which is Yumigahama. He saw him in a match, and his assessment of him in that match was that he was as strong as Agito.
So I do remember this panel. A lot of Yumi goons use this to debate about. I personally just think Himuro is just a glazer to an insane degree. Even the story itself kind of memes on him a bit. Someone on par with the legends due to him, you know, being there in Kengan Ashura but not fighting in the tournament due to getting shit on by Canada. But I don't think anyone entirely agrees with this claim, but could be the case, but based on feats which do outweigh statements, it is not.
Now granted, he's one character. One could even say he's trying to provoke Agito into actually getting into a match with him, because he is trying to recruit him in that scene. But when he transfers over to Purgatory, he is there as an A-lister and is picked for the competition by Toyoda himself to go up against the Kengan Association. So Toyoda was quite confident.
I mean, yes, he was confident in Yumi to a degree, but we know a lot of the Purgatory gladiators were very disappointing, And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of them were shitting on Yumi quite a bit. Like, they didn't really respect him that much. And we didn't really get any insight about Yumi's fights with the other A-list gladiators to do some comparisons.
In Yumigahama's abilities. So even if Ryo is exaggerating, given the fact that Yumigahara was actually an ex-Fang of Metsudo, there is some credibility to be had there. However, there are really two problems when it comes to scaling Yumigahara in the A tier. The first one is his character profile. And if you've read it before, I'll have it on the screen at this point. The author just straight up states that when Yumigahara transferred over to Purgatory, he stagnated in power.
Yeah, he had no reason to pretty much grow in power as he already achieved what he wanted to a degree. You could even argue the same thing since like around the Misasa fight until now, that he's pretty much been the same.
Does not bode well for Yumi, and I'll take it a step further. I'll say, since he's outside of Purgatory at this point in the story, but considering he is still doing the same things that he was doing before, he has the exact same habits, I would say this is also true up until today. The second issue is his performance against Misasa, which is, for the most part, quite a one-sided fight. So unless we're about to bump up Misasa a tier, there is something wrong with putting Yumi at the A tier.
People, like, for Misasa, I don't think that many people regard him as even close to Kano now. He was kind of shit on alongside some of the Kurei and other Metsudo guard members by Shen Wulong, but that really isn't an anti-feat. Anyone would be shit on by Wulong at that point. The main issue I have with him is we're kind of just lacking in fights. The only one we've seen on screen is against Yumi still. He is confirmed as the current Fang in the story, but more fights are definitely required to make a definitive ranking for him or gauge him properly, but people don't really consider him as on the same tier as Kano. Likewise with how he talks to Kano, viewing him as like a superior to a degree in all of their like character interactions.
However, as I said before, compatibility can affect how a match typically goes, but I think the bigger issue here,
I'm pretty sure in the early stages of the Yumi and Misasa fight, the monkey boy had the compatibility advantage, and then by the end it was in Misasa's favor due to his ultra close quarters combat select fighting style. But for the majority, compatibility wise, Yumi was at the advantage. I believe that's directly stated in the fight itself.
Here is the nature of the fight that Yumigahara and Misasa had, which was quite gimmicky with the whole light situation that was actually shrinking as time went on. And though Yumi at the start of the fight was doing relatively fine, but also Misasa was also toying with him as well, the reality is, as time went on, he found himself in a situation where he was in a disadvantage because of how big his frame was, and because Misasa has a lot more experience.
Started out Yumi's advantage, and then as it got smaller, Misa's advantage.
Being in the situation that he is in. So there were things that were working against Yumi in this fight that...
So, compatibility is a factor. I wouldn't say it's an extreme factor. It was very clear that Misasa was much stronger than Yumi. And if people don't consider Misasa S tier, he could be, like, of course, but at the very least low S tier, definitely not in the higher ends. Most people probably say around the top of A tier. You can't really put Yumi on the same tier as him. At least I think that's pretty agreeable and a common belief right now.
I think does affect how you view Yumi's performance. In fact, to compare
another fight where two A tiers face one another. You have Seki and Okubo with their recent fight. That was high difficulty, could have gone either way. Seki came out on top due to pure Mad Lad energy. But that was very different to Misasa versus Yumi, who I'm guessing he's arguing are on the same tier, unless Misasa's above, but yeah.
Fang goes on to say that yeah, Misasa's quite powerful, like even he wouldn't be able to take him down quite as easily, but he does acknowledge that yeah, Yumi was at a disadvantage at a certain point and would have done better in a regular match. And so I think it's quite a balance.
Yeah, because Yumi's biggest chance was off the go during the start of the fight when he had the huge advantage, but bro could not do nothing.
Take to put him probably mid or low A tier, somewhere around there. And
Was that for Yumi or Misasa?
mid or low A tier, somewhere around there. And considering that most of the verse is getting strong at this point, he would probably fall off to the lower parts of A tier. But even with that, he is still considered, at least going by what the narrator says at the end of the fight between him and Koga, he's still considered a top fighter in inverted.
See, with the top fighter statement in the recent chapter, the issue is that a lot of the other fighters in Kengan are just complete fodder. Yes, Yumi's no S tier. There's a lot of fighters above him. There's a lot of fighters in A tier and B tier right now. But those are the known fighters to us, like the readers. There's hundreds of other fighters that are complete fodder, like C tier, B tier, etc., where Yumi is objectively above, which naturally makes him a top fighter in the underground, even due to the previous title of Fang just by default.
A top fighter in inverted commas. I would say that that means that he's around the A tier level because those are the top fighters. Like,
I guess you can make that argument, but that would mean the A tier category of fighters is like insanely large. For example, you could have maybe 15 fighters in S tier, or maybe 10 fighters in S tier, and then like 30 in A tier. And I don't think I would have Koga beating a lot of those 30 in A tier alongside Yumi.
being an A-lister is quite an accomplishment in Purgatory. So the narrative seems to also have at least a similar framing to where, yeah, Yumigahama isn't really the best person personality-wise, but his power is still respected. And honestly,
I think a major thing about Yumi outside of this is he has insane potential, but bro just a lazy mofo.
I don't think that that's a big stretch. But if Yumi is an A-tier fighter, Koga beat Yumi more definitively and in more favorable conditions for Yumi than Misasa did. Misasa had to come in with a strategy, had to entice him into a situation where he would be at a disadvantage. I think Misasa would have won either way, but as Lolong said, Yumi would have performed better. The fact that Koga could come in where Yumi should feasibly have so much more going for him in his fight against...
See, that's all a fair point. Like, Koga destroyed Yumi in a probably more impressive way than what Misasa did considering the circumstances, which does make Koga look monstrous. But even then, does that mean he can hang with the other guys on S tier? Koga himself believes he can, as he mentions in that chapter as well, that he's now ready to help Oma, the, certified S tier, as everyone agrees. So, narratively speaking, it could be the case.
Koga. There's no ring, he has weapons, he starts off with a knife, and he just gets absolutely devastated. In fact, towards the end of the fight where Koga activates his foresight killing, Yumi doesn't do anything. He can't do anything to Koga. I would say Koga, in his performance in that fight, meets requirement number 1 for me. It isn't that it was a low diff, it was an ultra low diff. And considering the strength that Yumi has, I think that
the strength Yumi was narratively implied to have in the past, but never shown, which is the biggest issue I have with the Yumi scale. But narratively speaking, Koga being S tier now is very possible. One thing for sure is that he will be reaching the S tier. There's no questions about it. Protagonist of the story has the Nico style now, the fist eye, trained by all these other top tiers, even Wulong partly now. Bro has everything going for him. But can he hang with Omura and the others in S tier right now? I wouldn't particularly agree, and I would still say I could probably rank at least 20 fighters above Koga still, but maybe that just means there's over 20 characters in S tier as an example.
Koga would perform similarly against any other A tier. Really, all that's left to officially put him in S tier is a fight against someone who's already there. So, a fight against Agito, a fight against, I think Rito, there might be a case for him being S tier now.
Rito S tier now. Could be. Bro's been training, he was the winner of the Berserker Ball, but again, I don't think many people even believe that. Like, is Rito stronger than Carlos and Ludong? I wouldn't really say so. We know Koga in the previous aspects of the story was not stronger than Ludong. Is he stronger than Ludong now? I would probably say no still as an example, which does limit him from reaching S tier for me personally, but of course, good video regardless. It's very interesting to hear other people's perspectives. Make sure to check out his video, leave a like, subscribe to his channel. Subscribe here on Mysterious Chad, much more content coming here on this channel, and of course, watch this video. Laters, boys.